Xavas, you are have since the end of the campaign, you've been able to keep Volan around for a little longer, and you have her kind of locked up in a cell, and you currently find yourself sitting across from her, her already in manacles, and you know, very much a prisoner at this point. What would you like to do?
I turn to her and look, I just have a few questions. I I plan on taking off come the next morning, so this may be the last time you see me, and who knows, Aslan may set you free. But the questions I have for you are, what is your name? Other than what's your surname?
My surname is Kinyore. Volan Kinyore.
Who's your master, Volankinore?
My master. You mean the wizard that trained me and sent me out
Yes,
here?
that wizard, yes.
His name is Archimedes de Krell. He's a divination wizard. Like I mentioned previously, he was the one who told me where I would find Arsalan and who I should work with in order to find him most efficiently.
I have but maybe two more questions for you.
I'm not going anywhere.
It's fair. Then, maybe another question. If you're so powerful, I've seen you teleport before. Why haven't you just escaped and left?
Escape from you? From Arsalan? Or escape from
Yes,
Rukvar?
let's be quite candid. I know you're more powerful than Arsalan, and he admitted it himself.
Oh, yes, yes.
So why haven't you left? You could easily leave after a day or so of rest.
You could call it a wizard's honor, perhaps. Maybe I feel like I need to. If he wants to let me live for another 3 years and is convincing the rest of you lot that that is a good idea, then maybe I should deserve that trust for now. So I stick around.
So you have some sort of honor, yet you would freely let a kid die, and who knows how many other people you've killed.
That was a different time. That was before I was captured.
No one just changes just because they've been captured once. How many
What
people have
makes
you
you
killed?
think that? How many people have I killed? None
Yes.
at this point in time. That
This
boy,
confuses me.
the hobgoblins did all the killing. I was just there guiding them to Gawk and helping Rukvar with this little problem of his so I could get at Arsalan.
Knowing that Rukvar would stop at no means in killing innocent halflings in Red Cairn, and you still chose to help him.
Well, yes. I had my goals, he had his. They aligned at the time. It made sense. Doesn't mean it was the right choice. It doesn't mean it was the morally correct one. Granted, my morals have always been a little skewed, but since I did find Arsalan, and he would have bested me, but he chose to delay our actual duel, I figure might as well not make a scene anymore.
I very much see you as a fool.
Possibly.
One who does not calculate his own decisions well. One does not even take into stake how powerful you may be.
I've always seen it as sometimes even the more powerful, you need other people to do things. To not be. Had I just come here on my own, who knows what would have happened with Arsalan? He would have probably tried to delay it, it wouldn't have put me at a very good advantage to try and kill him, which was my goal. There's things. I don't expect everyone to understand my decisions and my methods.
Last question. Did you train those hobgoblins?
The ones who use magic.
Yes.
Oh no, they already knew it. Rukvar's been at this a long time.
Then my decision's made. Arsalan deals with you then. And I walk out and I leave, not telling anybody where I'm going.
Okay. We're gonna get more into that
Yeah,
when we have the whole group together.
probably.
Daniel, thanks for joining me today. For anyone watching, thank you guys for being here. Today we're talking with Daniel, aka Xavas Lunerunner, the Waymaker, the Bard / Cleric. You said you ended up with 3 Bard levels and 2 Cleric levels in the end?
Yeah, by the end of this point. I don't know where that would have gone if we kept going and the longer that Xavas continues leveling, but for now.
All right. Before we get into it, though, Daniel, how did you get into the game? Where did this all start for you?
So, very first time I played D&D was the worst experience I've ever had in my life. It was in high school with, I ended up playing with my cousin. We ended up joining this group after school. I don't know what level they were. I don't even know what edition it was. All I know is they were way higher level, and we started at level 1. I had no clue what was going on. I didn't know anything. And so, because of that, I didn't play D&D for the next 4 years.
Okay.
But later down the line, it was literally the Christmas after me and my wife got married. My wife's sister husband, so her brother-in-law, I don't really know what that makes our relationship other than family by marriage somewhere.
Yeah. I always just label it in-laws. They're just in-laws. Yeah, that's the whole thing.
Something. Anyways.
Yeah.
But like, he invited me to a game, and I've always been like saying like, it's like I don't know if I really want to join, but I was kind of hitting that niche as like I'm kind of like video games just aren't doing it for me. I know in college, like a couple of my friends and a group of us like talked about joining D&D, but none of us ever DM'd, none of us ever thought about it. But essentially, he invited me to a game. I created a Genasi wizard.
Okay.
And we just went through a dungeon, and I thought it was great. I got hooked. I bought a player's handbook right away, started making characters, and I think it was 2 or 3 months later, I asked like, hey, can I DM a game? Because I had an idea for a one shot, and I DM'd my first game, and so like literally right immediately I just started playing.
Yeah, and now you are a forever DM.
In one game, I'm a forever DM. In the other game, I still play with my in-law brother. We'll just say brother-in-law for now.
Yeah.
I still play with my brother-in-law in that group, which is nice. Every so often we rotate. He actually took a year to DM Storm King's Thunder, which was nice. In that game, I played a Dragonborn Warlock that then turned Dragonborn Sorcerer. Through some really interesting magical means.
Yeah.
But yeah, so now I am DMing both of the games. One game is it's online with a group of friends from college, just kind of we've all spread across the US, and then the other game I am DMing a pirate, or it's not even a pirate because they're not really pirates anymore. They're struggling to figure out who they are.
Okay.
I'm playing but it's in a nautical-esque setting.
All right, so. those are fun. I like those kind. You always start saying, "Oh, I'm going to be a pirate. We're doing pirates," and then it devolves or evolves into something completely different. But still, nautical is always a good time. So, how long ago did you say was your first good game? Then you said
3-ish years.
3-ish years. So yeah, not
actually
long.
It's closer to 4. Closer to 4 now that I'm thinking about it.
Okay. Yeah,
Yeah.
not terribly long, but that always I think that happens more often than we give credit. I had a similar thing where my first experiences weren't that great. It was playing 4th edition back in college. But then when I played 5th edition the first time, I was hooked. I think that happens quite a bit.
Mm-hmm.
But let's get into talking about your character.
Yeah.
Um, he's an interesting one. He's opinionated and a talker. Where does Zavis come from? What's your backstory? That's what people want to know.
So, Savis in creation went through very many iterations. Because then, in all honesty, the first iteration of Savis was the standard bard who goes around from town to town talking to every woman and has a reputation of potential children that he doesn't know about. Um, which is definitely not the Savis that ended up coming to fruition.
No.
Because Savis was essentially like, as I kept sitting, like thinking about who is Savis, I just didn't want to play a bard who was ethically or morally like gray. I wanted to play
Mm-hmm.
one that like legitimately cared about people. And so in his backstory, and it kind of showed a lot through the campaign, at least once session two hit, Savis doesn't know his father. He's half elf,
Mm-hmm.
but he was raised primarily by his mother, though his father did leave him quite a fortune. Essentially,
Mm-hmm.
Savis never had the struggle growing up. And there's a whole interesting backstory that, I mean, would you like me to delve into this whole
Yeah, let's
backstory
get
or?
into it. Yeah, go
Yeah,
for it.
so Savis was not this charismatic bard at all growing up. Um, so essentially, he always lived a life um, kind of awkward, kind
Mm-hmm.
of incompetent, and primarily because of the fact that his father left him at a young age, really just right after his birth. He really felt unloved. He felt like he was left, and like even though, I mean, the only few times that he didn't feel this unlove was when he was with his mother. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but in Sabbath's 18th year of life, his mother was kind of struck in with this affliction. Um, Not really sure exactly what it was, just she was dying. And Savis didn't know what to do. Savis couldn't do anything. And his mother passed. Um, and thus brings kind of this being that kind of came out of nowhere. Savis was kind of just sitting in his room, um, or not really sitting in his room, but sitting in his house, and went to his mother's room, kind of just standing at his mother's bed, and just started weeping. Um, then he hears a voice from behind her just asking, "What's wrong?" And she saw this woman who had golden hair, a dark complexion, and um, Savis reached for his blade, never really wielding a blade before in his life, as he just had this conversation and had this encounter with this woman, who he was at his lowest point that he really has ever been in his life. Um, and through a series of just conversations, questions, and whatnot, um,
Mm-hmm.
essentially the lady offered him kind of a exchange that he could take away all his feelings of sadness and anger and loneliness and replace it with a promise, a comfort, um, just essentially she said she wanted to do this just for the sake of doing something nice and
Mm-hmm.
bringing change to his life. Um, Kind of continued on and on from there. And she eventually did do exactly what she said. She took away sadness, took away anger, took away loneliness. And Savis was elated, and kind of said, I have to do something. I have to do something for you. And essentially, kind of the tenets of his life. And I don't think I ever said it in the campaign, but essentially, the tenets of his life are um, be righteous, because change is inevitable, and through righteousness you can ensure that change is for the better. Rise against tyranny, fight for freedom, of yourself and others when you can, and inspire others to fight when you cannot. The next one is luck always favors the bold. Your fate is always your own to grasp, and to do so is to have the change bringer behind you. And then his last one, which wasn't one that the lady ended up telling him, was never leave anyone behind. Which is really interesting as to the decision that I made just then.
Mm-hmm.
But essentially, after that, Xavas kind of just wandered around on the continent that he's from. He kind of just wandered from town to town. There's a couple other stories here and there, but because of this meeting with this being that he can only refer to as the Changebringer, is the only name that she gave him. He just wanted to bring justice and continue to allow other people to smile and feel the same feelings that he feels every single day. So, yeah, that's kind of the premise of Xavas.
Yeah, it's an interesting one because also you kind of created this deity, the Changebringer, which at the beginning I was like, oh yeah, we'll figure deities out, and then you came up with it, and I was like, okay, that's cool. Let's go with that. So now that's now a deity in my world, at least in this age of it that we played in. And then you went through this whole campaign with Xavas and went through some tough spots where I essentially kind of beat you guys down as much as I could, until you guys in that last session you guys pulled out a victory against Rukvar out of nowhere. Like, I don't even know what happened. I turned around and then he was dead, and it was like, well, okay. And then you got stuck in this spot now where you're like, well, the people who should be the most upset with Volan don't seem to care. Where that anger, if the Changebringer took away your anger, it's back. Is that a valid assumption there?
It's really weird because I was sitting there like as Daniel, I was really getting confused too. So I was sitting there, it's like, this doesn't make any sense, and like I was like, Xavas doesn't think this makes any sense, and it was a real struggle because I don't think it's necessarily that Xavas has it is a version of anger, but I think the better way to describe it is he's just frustrated. He doesn't understand, and it's confusing. And so he hasn't and which is kind of where he's at this point where he wants to do something, but it seemingly is as if the thing that he believes is justice and a way to be just or enact some form of justification is being told by the people that he's been traveling with that that's not just. And it's really weird, especially hearing it from. I think the part that really kind of messed with Xavas was when Riken just said, "I forgive you," and I was like, "This, yeah. It just didn't. It's to right now. I still don't understand why we're okay with Volan, and I mean, because Xavas is definitely not okay with Volan."
I think that's a conversation we'll have to have in the next stream when everyone's on. Being able to talk about the character mindset in that sense is. I think that can make an interesting conversation because in my mind, and I'll just tell you, Volan was never, she was never the leader kind of person. Like, she had her goal. She was there for Arsalan. It was, and it was one of those, I was trying to do one of those things where it was like, sometimes there is no connection. Sometimes it's not, a special, deeper conspiracy kind of situation.
And I think that's what makes Xavas even more frustrated. Is that it's like, so you did this. Essentially, it's like this idea of so you did this for fun.
Yeah, it's like this is a game to you then. Yeah.
So, yeah. It's definitely frustrating.
Well, then I'm glad. That's frustrating for you, for Xavas. I approve of that then. No remorse. Let's talk a little about your party members because I've done this with everyone else, so I want to get Xavas' thoughts. I know it's changed since the finale, but what are your thoughts on your party member? Let's start with Ironbark. What did Xavas feel about Ironbark?
So Ironbark, I don't think. so it's interesting because post game, like whenever when you leave, we kind of just sit and kind of just talk about what happened in the session. And
Mm-hmm.
so I've always enjoyed talking to Chris and like his opinions and everything. But it's really interesting because I don't. But the in because in character, I don't think Savis really gets Ironbark, and it's more so it's like I don't understand. There's this part. It's like I don't. One, you're different, and it's not
Mm-hmm.
like there's a bad thing about it, but it's like I don't understand why you think this way. And I mean, Daniel as a player looking in is like, well, that's how Warforged Druid for you. That's just how that
Yeah.
makes total sense. But Savis is very confused because in terms of just the mannerisms and the choices and the things he said, it is really confusing. It's hilarious to look at and it's hilarious to watch. Um, but Savis is generally just confused. He's not opposed. He finds that Ironbark is a valuable member and does what he does well. Um,
Mm.
and when he does, and the things that he doesn't even know about Ironbark that end up coming up out of nowhere are extremely helpful. And so Savis is glad to have Ironbark, and I think neutrally, I mean, really, Ironbark is a very neutral party to Savis, and it's kind of I think that's kind of also something like Savis has difficulty becoming friends with Ironbark because he just doesn't get Ironbark at all.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Yeah,
but
he's kind of this odd perspective on, well, everything.
yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting. I never got that from the gameplay. I never kind of picked up on that. So that's really interesting for me to hear. What about Riken? I know in the session 0 we did the little activity, and with Riken and Xavas it was about being righteous and helping the weaker was your guys' connection. But how did you think things went with Riken throughout the campaign?
I think Riken was the person that Sav definitely connected with, I guess, the most in terms of just a general friendship. I think just that
Mm-hmm.
idea of you have this person because Savis wasn't. I mean, Savis didn't start out cleric. Savis
Yeah,
started out as um,
just a bard.
bard, and
Yeah.
then even though there was even from the very beginning of his bardic nature, there was always some sort of deity. He wasn't necessarily calling you or calling upon her for anything.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but it was really kind of through Riken that he realized like there maybe she wasn't there, like maybe the Changebringer wasn't there just for a moment. Maybe she is supposed to be someone that shows up more often, because Riken talks about his grandfather, um,
Castalos.
Castalos, yes,
Yes.
Castalos, often enough,
Mm-hmm.
and so it's interesting, and I think Anthony was the one who said it at the very first was something along the lines of like they're best friends. They both have blonde hair. So I think there's like this. I think to him, there's a little bit of also. It's kind of that weird like high school clique mentality of like you and I look the same, so we have to be friends kind of deal.
Yeah.
Because so I think like and then generally like both I think of the two or of the four of us in the group, Riken and Savis are the most charismatic, I think, statistically. So and it also
Mm-hmm.
kind of shows because we talk, I think, the most. Um, so it's definitely he's quite a fan of Riken until the last moment where it just got really confusing. But yeah.
Yeah. Which that'll be interesting. When we get to unpack that a little bit more, that'll be interesting because I'm also curious, like why Riken went that route and made that decision in that end moment. I'm
Hmm.
wasn't too sure about it. And then Arsalan,
Hmm. So this is
three for a
there's
twist.
like two feelings because of how everything ended.
Yeah.
But for the most part, prior to the last moment, Savis looked at Arsalan as really someone he could trust and relate to. I mean, especially in that combat with Rukvar in session 3 and 4, like there was a lot of we are both very similar. We're both human. We both have some form of arcane magic that we use, that we need to use to manipulate the battlefield and everything that's going on. And so I think from just a general standpoint, like we see each other as equals. And I think that also adds to the end when we were really upset with each other because for the most part, everything in the campaign we looked eye to eye to, and we
Mm-hmm.
saw that like even with when the town was in trouble, we both wanted to prepare the town and get ready for battle. And exploring the dungeon. We were both very, very careful about how we continued through
Yeah.
the area, and so and with Rukvar, like making sure that even though we're squishy, we have a way out. And I mean, I think in terms of that last fight, that one, it's really exhilarating to completely like foil the plans of a player almost dying. Like it, there was like my notes are like 3 pages long of just that fight because I make sure to write notes about what I wanted to do, and I was constantly crossing off once people started going down. But yeah, I mean, taking Arsalan and diving into the river with him was a total gamble, which I'm so happy worked.
It paid off.
Um,
It paid off.
but yeah, it's definitely one of those things until the end. Like I think he trusted Arslan the most, even though he was really good friends with Riken. I think in terms of trusting and just the general mindset of what Xavas wanted to do and what Arslan wanted to do, generally lined up. So
Hmm.
yeah,
So do you think that that trust and that connection that Xavas had built up with Arsalan made that last decision of Arsalan's that much more confusing and like it's
oh for
like
sure.
maybe Xavas felt a little betrayed in that moment of like we
Oh
were the
yeah, no,
same and
betrayal
then
is definitely the right word to use for that point because yeah, Savas has no clue what's going on.
interesting.
So
Interesting. I like that. That's okay. Okay. All right. There I feel like there's a lot to unpack there. That in the moment was like the most inter-party conflict that we had like in the whole
I think it
campaign.
really was the only inter-party
It was.
conflict.
Yeah, there was
So
never
no.
any moments of like, you guys getting angry at each other, just that one moment. But
Hmm.
maybe that's my genius. No, I'm joking. It just worked out nicely. I wanted to talk to you actually about in the dungeon
Hmm.
under the well. When I got your character information, the biggest mystery, one of the large mysteries on there was your dad not being there.
Hmm.
And, you were raised wealthy, a comfortable life, but you never really knew your father, um, which then tied into the well. But you always had that amulet. What was going through Zavas's mind in the well from the moment that you saw that like the amulet was kind of the key to the door, all the way through finding an ancestor in there? What was happening with Zavis there?
Kind of just wondering, like
Mm-hmm.
it really was just a giant mystery. It's like why he I mean, I felt that it was just one of those things like why exactly was Sabas called here? And that really it really was one of those things where I really felt like Sabas was called here
Mm-hmm.
because there's no way that spanning multiple continents, day or weeks travel away from where he was from, not even knowing his father, just knowing his father's name, really, and then very, very small memories of just maybe what he looks like. And most of those are probably fabricated through pictures. Um, but it was one of those moments where, I mean, as Daniel, I had no clue. Like, I was like, there's none of this background stuff is ever going to come up. I'm some bard from a nowhere town. Um, that's never going to come up. And when it came up, I mean, I was very surprised, and I kind of played that off as Savas, like as partially skeptical. It's like I thought, like there was that idea of like I thought my family left me,
Mm-hmm.
and now it's not exactly my dad, but this is someone who is part of my bloodline. And then that goes into the whole idea of blood heir, which I mean I definitely still have so many questions about,
Mm-hmm.
especially because Volan has no clue what the point of the blood heir was, other than to maybe summon Gok.
Mm-hmm.
Looking back, we probably should have killed Volan and then questioned Rukvar, but that's just not how the cards played.
Yeah. I mean, Rukvar was definitely he was a target of Riken. Like, I don't know how that would have played out if you guys tried to question Rukvar. It would have
I
been
don't think
very
it would have
difficult.
happened,
Um,
even
in that,
though, yeah.
even though Riken was trying in the end there, he went from being the I'm gonna kill him to, I'm gonna work with the team kind of thing and wait for the
Hmm.
moment. And then he went to the I'm gonna kill him kind of
Yep.
mindset after that. Um, let's see what else. Any viewers, if any of the viewers have questions, leave them in the chat. We'll talk about it. Jack Grimble says Xavas was the voice of reason that was gone the moment the rave had started and the drug dealer came with the ecstasy.
I don't remember a
Not
moment
sure how
when we
that
had.
works.
I don't even know. I don't even know what moment that would be in the campaign. What is the
I think that's
rave of
just
the
the end.
campaign?
I think that's the end. Oh, so this is a good one from Chris.
Mm-hmm.
He's a few minutes behind. You haven't answered this, but do you think Xavas would stay with anyone in the group or go solo after this?
I think he's very set on he doesn't really want to be with Arsalan. And I think it's more so because Savis has a lot of things going. I think there's a couple things going through his mind. It's just I don't get it. Why did you? Why would we allow her to be alive? Not even just be alive. Why would we like? Why would you just let her go freely? Because currently she's locked up. But I think that's more so because Savis like it said we need to lock her up, and Savis is like because Savis couldn't legitimately find a way to justify the means of her end, I guess. Because Savis, I don't think would have taken his sword up and just killed her. Like,
Yeah.
he just, I don't think he really wants to be around Arsalan. Though I don't think he really wants to be like close to Riken so much. But I don't think he's burnt that bridge, quote unquote, mentally with Riken. And if Riken chose to just say, "Hey, I can't let you go alone," Savis would totally just be like, "All right, you can follow me. I don't know where I'm going, but you can follow me." And I don't know if I definitely would say like Ironbark could I definitely be with Ironbark, but I think there's too much of a connection with Ironbark and Arsalan that I just don't think it ultimately would work out. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. It's an interesting, like, thinking about the dynamics in the party, how the party worked together that way. That's interesting, though, that you're not quite, Zavis isn't quite, like, to the point of, like, I burned the bridge, I'm alone, I'm going to be alone now. He's more like, I don't know, I'm going to keep my distance. I don't want to be with that person right now, but.
Mm-hmm. I think, though, I think Savis is curious for sure. I think he's very curious as to exactly what Arsalan ends up doing. And I think in 3 years' time, if he hears and knows of where this fight is going to be, he'd definitely show up and watch it. But I don't think I don't think he would approve. I'll say this. If Volan is freed and allowed to go back into the real world and do whatever she wants to do, then that would be difficult to just be with Arslan. If Arslan does agree that she needs to be in prison, she wouldn't leave per se, but he would work with the party to figure out what we're gonna do.
Oh man,
No.
juicy things to talk about then. Let's look ahead a little bit. Let's look ahead.
Yeah.
We can do two scenarios. We can do one where Volan is set free and one where Volan is kept in prison. Where do you think Xavas would go next in his story, his life? What would his next goal be?
So, two things, and I don't think I don't think either of these things that like Savis would do hinges on Volan.
Okay.
Whether it's with Arsalan or whether it's without Arsalan, he definitely wants to figure out who the heck Gok is, like, and find these. Like, he has in his notebook the names of the dwarf, the human, and the halfling. He knows that Tandy's alive, so he's curious. And in all honesty, there's this part of him that wants to take Tandy with him, but also but also wants to, at bare minimum, wants to secure that Tandy is safe in this halfling town, which he feels a little bit more confident, though against another hobgoblin threat like that, he's not really sure. But he definitely wants to find this this dwarven bloodline, and find this human bloodline, and find out if there are more blood heirs. That also being said, he also, I think, at this point would then, because he never really had a desire to find his father, but now has a desire to find him, whether he be alive or not. One would assume so because he's an elf, and he lives a long time. Um,
Yeah.
but at least find his father. If not find his father, find his family, or find the kingdom that he was called to. Um, I mean,
Hmm.
one to ask questions about. I mean, I think there's also the way of figuring out who is Gok that way, but also just to figure out who exactly his father is and why he left and all this stuff. So,
Interesting.
so.
Yeah, I could see Zavis just embracing or looking to that side. That's kind of an interesting route.
He's definitely become less of a free spirit, and I think through this time and through really this being his first adventure, um, he's very much become more determined as a person rather than just going about freely
Hmm.
changing things for the good. He definitely finds himself as someone. I think he's understand that there's a long game that's being played with Gok and everything, that needs to be taken care of, while
Hmm.
also in the meantime, in very small cases, from the towns he kind of visits, just making sure that everything is just and righteous. So.
Yeah. It's an interesting thing. I want to look back again to your deity, the Changebringer,
Hmm.
and the adoption of the nickname the Waymaker that Zavis had.
Hmm.
We talked about your kind of your mantra, your belief system. What made him choose the Waymaker, and like, can we get like just a glimpse of
Yeah.
like a moment from Zavis's life pre-adventure where he embodied the idea of being the Waymaker?
Yeah. So first thing, I'll preface this. I did not create the Changebringer. I actually, well, I took it from two sources.
Okay.
One in Matthew Mercer. That's the pantheon that he uses.
Oh, okay.
Um, but also prior to Matt Mercer, this is the fourth edition uh, uh, domain system, which is the Dawn War pantheon.
Okay. See,
Which
I did not know that.
so it is an actual pantheon,
Hmm.
and it's actually the pantheon or the deity system that I use in my homebrew worlds,
Okay.
just because I did not want to have to create a completely new divinity system, just because I found that it was difficult. And the thing I like about this or the Dawn War pantheon system is that it's very loose in what
Hmm.
a deity is a deity of in term versus the Forgotten Realms is very specific. This deity is
Yeah.
the deity of this and only is the deity of this portfolio. And so I just didn't one I also didn't want a hundred deities, lesser, intermediate, and it's more simple when you have, I think there's a total of 18. So, but that being said, so as soon as Savis became Savis, like the Savis we know now, he really was only given one name, which was the Changebringer. Which he's like, there's no way this is. It's like I'll do my darndest to spread your word, but the thing that he wanted to do is he wanted to make ways for people. He wanted to make a way for the Changebringer. If
Hmm.
essentially how he believes it works is by him going somewhere and spreading goodness and change, he then allows the Waymaker to come through and give him a more permanent change. And essentially, even now, like especially as a cleric, I think he's definitely more, let's use the word evangelical about it, where he really
Hmm.
does want to introduce people to the Changebringer. He definitely sees himself as someone who does make a way, um, which is very interesting, I guess, in what he says. I think so. His very first adventure, like, and so I actually I didn't write it out, but I wrote like a small like 3 sentences about his very first adventure, which is also why he knows Goblin, by the way.
Okay.
Um, so he actually, when he was just starting out and starting to explore the world, he actually came into a village that was actually having some issues with this goblin king who was kind of attacking the village. Um, and essentially, what he did was he went to the goblins,
Hmm.
um, spent a couple months with them, kind of talking with them. For somehow not getting eaten, mostly
Right.
because of his. I like to attribute it to him, just the fact that he was able to kind of converse and somehow convince the goblins that he was not trying to kill them. And so he essentially invited the goblins to a dinner with this town's lord. And by being this person, after learning the goblin language, which actually was pretty simple and not too difficult because their words are very obvious as what they're trying to say, um, he essentially became this person who translated between the goblins and the town lord and the townsfolk. Um, Essentially, the goblins were just upset because the townsfolk were um, kind of uh, going into their hunting grounds, and so the goblins started losing a lot of food. They couldn't hunt anymore because their source of food was being hunted. And so essentially, this conversation defined hunting borders between the towns. They released the prisoners of each other. They started setting up trade, and so essentially, there's a town somewhere in this world where humans and goblins essentially have a mutual agreement as to whose borders are whose, and they kind of talk with you. And that's really like I because like as I was making the character, I was like I was choosing languages like goblin, and I can't just not. I had to put a story as to why I know Goblin, and it's not just some
Mhm.
random thing that I know. So yeah, that's why he knows goblins, and so essentially, like this idea of him being there and then allowing the Waymaker to continue to, or not, the Changebringer to change the current climate is kind of how he sees himself. So yeah.
Okay, interesting. That's a good story. Um, oh man, you've sparked some conversation. Jack Grimble, um, is that more prone to go storyteller or religious with everything else that happened? Do you have an answer for that? Are you more prone to go like religious bard, or are you more to go bard from
I
here on
think
out?
it's I I would argue to say both are going full. Or I am more inclined to be more bard. I think the spread will generally, in terms of levels, will be more bard. And
Mm-hmm.
to answer the question, I think in terms of being someone who's more religious or being someone who's more bardic, I think he'd really do his best to balance both. And by sharing stories of what the
Mm-hmm.
Changebringer has done, um, and really kind of I don't I think he really does want to actually have a conversation with the Changebringer at some point.
Mm-hmm.
But he's not one to seek her out fully. He does
Right.
desire it, but it's not like a main driving force of him. I think he definitely wants to figure out who Gok is and find his family. So
Okay. Interesting. And Anthony says he has so much to say about Arsalan, but he's going to save it for the group discussion, which we will have to schedule. Last
uh,
question for you then,
yeah.
Daniel. Last question. What is a tip that you have for new D&D players? Like, what's your number one tip for players?
So this may be a very long explained tip
That's fine.
because I think one of my favorite things is introducing people to D&D. Um, which I am constantly doing, even to my wife, who's only played a game of D&D once. I continually try her to be a part of a campaign that I end up running. But my number one tip to players, in terms of creating or playing the game, creating characters, is create a character. Your stats will come later. And in all honesty, I'll even go further and say your stats don't matter.
Mm-hmm.
Like I think D&D at its finest. Now, I think the stats are definitely important. By all stretch of the imaginations, as some of you have seen, I rules lawyer like crazy. I know a lot of the rules, and I tell people I am a walking encyclopedia of rules. I try to be, at least. I might get some
Mm-hmm.
wrong. But the number one thing for creating a character is creating a character. I mean, for me, creating Xavas, I literally just wrote the I just started writing a story about who is Xavas and why is he an adventurer?
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, the story of knowing who the Changebringer was is why he's an adventurer. Granted, that story was 3 pages long. I don't necessarily think you need to go that in depth, I would say the longer you think the campaign's going to go, the more you should probably write, just so that way you know who your character is. But when you create a character first and you know who they are, you know what this character is, what their motivations are, honestly, the stats kind of just fall in line. It just kind of makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
And I think but it's also one of those things. If you do fail, that's part of your character. You know, we all, like, even us as human beings, we all fail, you know? So roll with the punches, like, nail your character down. Your spells kind of make him go in line. Uh, as great as as great as maxing out your stats and making your spell DCs a lot higher is, um, I'll argue to say that as if you play your character right, the spell DC should generally, or at least your playing DC should generally go down. I mean, that's how I reward my players. If they can explain to me how they're picking the lock, the more details they give me, the lower that DC will be. The better their word choices, the lower the charisma or the persuasion check's going to be. So it's just one of those things. Make your character, write a story.
Make it a character, not a stat block.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Unless it's a one shot where you know you're fighting in an arena, then totally min max.
Then make a stat block.
I've totally done that before. I literally played a barbarian that hits. I made a barbarian that's a level 7 barbarian that for every attack he hits, it's equivalent to one fireball.
Oh wow.
Yeah, I min maxed really hard on that.
Yeah,
one.
that's a lot of min maxing right there. Remind me not to run a one shot like that with you in it. That would ruin my fight.
It really wasn't that overpowered because if I missed the attack, I dealt 0 damage.
Oh yeah, okay, that makes sense. That makes sense. So. Then one last question, then, as requested, since you are a DM, you do DM a lot. What's one piece of advice you have for new DMs who are getting into the game?
Also, I haven't been posting a lot. I have an Instagram page where I do give weekly DM tips and weekly player tips.
Yes.
So if you want more tips, you can go to my Instagram at the.adventures.calling. And so that's where you can get more tips if you do want more tips. But my number one tip to a DM is just keep doing it. Like, your first game isn't going to be perfect. Your second game isn't going to be perfect.
Nope.
The game that I just DM'd last Thursday was not perfect. But you get better, and it's obvious that you should probably prepare and plan things. That's something that just anytime you want to try anything, even creating a character and playing DM, you kind of want to prepare. You want to learn what your character does. That's really given stuff that I don't really think is a tip is to say prepare for your sessions. I feel like that's a gimme, or that's like it's a given thing for just being a DM. But really, just keep doing it. Voices are cool. Like all those little things that people talk about, that's really cool. But just keep doing it. If you fail, just you learn for the next time.
Keep going.
If you find something that really works, keep doing that too. So yeah, there's a whole lot of other resources. There's a whole lot of other tips about how to encounter balance and all that stuff. But the more practice that you get, the better you'll get at it. And I'll also say this as a preface, as something too. If you DM and it's not your thing, don't feel like you're forced to DM. Like, sometimes and I'll say this, and whoever's hearing this, you're a great person. But sometimes you're just not meant to be a DM. And that's not a bad thing. That just means you get to be a player now and screw with the DM.
Yeah. So. I think that's a really good point. Sometimes there can be a lot of pressure in the game of like, oh, I got to run my own game. But it's like, you don't have to.
And sometimes you just don't have time.
Yeah.
Sometimes you don't have the time to sit down and plan. And I mean, if that's the case, like go for modules. Even though I run a homebrew world, I actually do pull for modules from time to time, because in all honesty, sometimes their dungeon is a lot better than my dungeon because it actually makes more sense. But yeah, I mean, there are a whole lot of tips out there. But just keep doing it if you really think that you want to be a DM and if you enjoy it for sure, just keep going.
Keep going. Yeah.
Man.
All right, Daniel, thank you for coming on the show today.
Oh, anytime.
We're going to wrap it up. We'll be back, everybody. We're going to have another live stream with Daniel, Chris, Anthony, and Zach all on here talking about the campaign, asking questions, answering questions. I don't have a day set for that yet, but keep an eye on the community tab here on the channel for that and other social media sources. And with that, thank you guys all for watching, and we'll see you next time.
Peace.